Todd Little. So he's the CEO of the Kanban University, which is a global network of Kanban trainers and coaches, hundreds of them. And if you want to get involved in learning how to become a trainer so you can deliver these services, or how you can be more effective as a coach, similar to what David was talking about this morning, this is a guy who knows that whole program. He's in charge of that. Before that, or I think even still, part of the Agile Alliance, he's on the board of that. He's chairman of the Agile conferences. One of the reasons our conferences work well is his experience. And he was a manager at Lexmark Graphics, which is a subsidiary.
Landmark. Huh? Landmark.
It is Landmark. I was thinking Lexmark didn't make sense. Landmark Graphics was a subsidiary of Halliburton. But one of the things I think that's important about that is that this is an enterprise level company, and he was a senior manager in there. So the experience that he's going to share with us today is coming from that life experience that he's had. But Todd.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks. All right. So today we're going to talk about risky businesses and how that applies in business agility and what we do about it. So as Steve alluded, I spent a large part of my career developing software products for oil and gas exploration and production. And oil and gas is a very risky business in a number of different ways. It has a high degree of uncertainty. We're exploring, it's exploratory, and the nature of what we do is very much manage risk. It also has risk on the safety side, so I'll allude to that. And as I was in there, my background is in chemical petroleum engineering, but always developing software in that space. And I sort of became an accidental agilist, I guess, in that when I started seeing agility, I started realizing there were people who were finally understanding or talking the same way I was, because I was dealing in terms of understanding uncertainty, and then people were looking at managing for it. And came across some other like-minded people, in particular people like Chris Matz, Olaf Masson, who we've had a number, met at the very first Agile conference, 2003, had some very great conversations about how risky businesses, they were coming from the financial sector, I was coming from oil and gas, and there was a lot of similarities. There were things we learned from each other. Chris and Olaf went on, and I'll talk a little bit about real options in particular and what they were able to bring forth with that. But the whole idea is that we're in businesses, we're in spaces which are dealing in uncertainty and dealing with discovery. And that's what I want to cover today. I really want to cover risk management and how that works in some of these other industries. So let's look at software in particular, and this is a little parable I like to tell about what we see happen in far too many software projects. So there we go. We start with a little project kickoff, and Dorothy says, well, when are we going to get the requirements? Whoops, we need sound. Can we get sound on the computer? Sound on the computer. I thought you said. Does it sound? The sound is not playing. Yeah, sound. You got it? Okay.
All in good time, my little pretty. All in good time. But I guess it doesn't matter anyway.
Just give me your estimates by this afternoon. The team binds together.
Not so fast! Not so fast! I'll have to give the matter a little thought. Go away and come back tomorrow.
No, we need something today. Okay, then it'll take 2 years. You've heard this story? No, we need it sooner.
Doesn't anybody believe me?
I already promised the customer it'll be out in 6 months.
You're a very bad man.
We're not in Kansas anymore. The developer hero, he's going to get everything solved.
I may not come out alive, but I'm going in there.
Just about has things under control, and what do you think happens? You heard David talk about it this morning. It's answer to everything. The reorganization.
The great and powerful Oz has got matters well in hand.
My, people come and go so quickly here.
All right. And they get through that, and the developers got things, and now they go into testing. And what happens in testing?
Going so soon? I wouldn't hear of it. Why, my little party's just beginning.
And we hear this story over and over. We keep trying to do the same thing, trying to think we're going to be able to get different results by doing the same thing. But we need to change, and we need to manage things appropriately. So how do businesses deal with risk and uncertainty? How do other businesses handle this? Well, let's look at some. So I live in Houston, Texas. And Houston, Texas is on the coast. It's right about here. And this is a projection from various weather services back in 2005 of Hurricane Rita. So I'm living there. Hurricane Rita is coming through. Hurricane Rita, this is just 1 month after Hurricane Katrina has done some serious damage to New Orleans, which is just to the east here a little bit. And the weather reports on Hurricane Rita are that the Category 5, one of the highest sustained wind velocities that we've seen, and this is after Katrina was, I think it's just a hurricane Category 4. So we're thinking, oh my God, after what's happened to New Orleans, we're going to have some serious problems in Houston. We better worry about this. So this is, I think, 15 different weather services, how they projected out what the path was. So there's a couple of things we can say about this. What can we say about every single one of these projections? It's going to be wrong. It's not absolutely accurate, right? It can't possibly be precise because we're trying to forecast out too much. Now, what we can say is that the collective information is actually pretty useful. We can also say we can measure what we know, right? So that the origin is actually pretty accurate. But in fact, they're all wrong, and the actual path ends up missing Houston, which is great. If it goes to the east side, it tends to be dry, so it was actually relatively uneventful in Houston. But the amazing thing was it learned a lesson because we had a horrible attempt to evacuate. People were stranded for days trying to get out because there was so much fear, which was useful that we've learned that because now we can make improvements on that. And I use weather forecasting as an example of this because it is something we get better at, and there's things we learn from it. It's about learning, and it's about feedback. And so if we look at the projection here, as we gain information, we learn something new, and we can refine our perspective on where we're actually going to happen. And we want to know both when it's going to hit as well as where it's going to hit, right? And so this is the type of thing we can do with collecting data and doing active forecasting. And the thing we've learned in hurricane tracking is that as we discover and build better models, we can actually improve ourselves. And this is also, I think, the same case in software development. You can never get perfect. We're never going to get to the point where so we're always going to have uncertainty. The point is, can we do things to bound our uncertainty better, and can we do things to manage our uncertainty better? Let's look at movies. I think every movie starts out thinking we're going to be the next Titanic. Titanic, at the time, was the highest grossing film that was made. I think it's been surpassed by Avatar, and I don't know if anything else has surpassed that since then. But they all think they're going to be the next Titanic and make incredible amounts of money. The problem is they end up turning out to be the Titanic because the reality is 78% of films lose money. Right? So this is another industry that deals with a portfolio of risk. And what they need is enough big ones to pay out, right? So that's the model that they work on, is having a balanced risk portfolio. 6% of the films make 80% of the profit. And the key is making sure you've got, that you do enough of them and have enough diversity in your portfolio. Oil and gas. I talked about oil and gas being another industry. That's the one I'm highly familiar with, worked in the space for 30 plus years. Anybody have an idea as to what the failure rate is in oil and gas exploration? 98%? It's a little high, but there are probably places. But it's not too far off. 90 to 80% failure. 10 to 20% success rates in pure play wildcat exploration. But the payoffs are huge, right? This is the business that we ran. We developed software for helping people understand their risk profiles and how they operate. And the thing is, if you can take a 90% failure rate and turn it into an 80% failure rate, you've doubled your success. That's huge, right? And that's what we were providing by providing improvements in technology. So whatever that failure, the thing is you want to be able to get good at managing it, at understanding what that risk profile looks like. Poker. Poker is an interesting one. Texas Hold'em is, I'm from Texas. Texas Hold'em is a big poker game. This is one I want to look at because one of the things I also look at is what are the metrics you're using for evaluating success? So this is an interesting metric. What do you think about a metric called percent of hands won? Percent of hands won. Is it a good indicator for poker? See Brett saying no. Yeah. And Brett, why would it be no? What?
Because if you're playing with someone who's very good, they're going to bet low and let you win a few hands, then bet big and take the pot.
Absolutely, because it's not measuring the thing that matters, which is winning, right? And in fact, it's actually a pretty good correlator. It's a pretty good indicator of a bad poker player, right? Because in order to win, you have to stay in the hand. And really good poker players know how to get out really early. They know when the odds are in their favor, and they know when the odds are against them. So the thing is that businesses that know how to manage risk know when the risk is in their favor and know when it's against them. A good friend who he used to say, he continues to say, and I think it's a great one, is the whole idea is when the odds are against you, you're gambling. When the odds are for you, you're investing. Right? Casinos are investing. They're investing in a lot of people out there who are willing to lose their money. The people who are willing to lose their money are gambling, right? The odds are absolutely against them. So I think that's the big thing, the difference in risk management. Are you investing or are you gambling, right? And the idea is really good companies know how to invest and know how to invest properly. This is an interesting perspective on feedback, and I think feedback is critical. The whole element of risk management and being agile, being agility, it's all about feedback. But you have to know, is the feedback, are you getting the right type of feedback? So this is a story from World War II, and the British were interested in collecting data. They were the first, doing some early data analysis work. And so they looked at did a lot of detailed study of the planes that were coming back from the bombing missions. And so they did some data analysis and clustering, and they said, oh, these planes are being shot, and we see some clusters of where the bullets are hitting. And so the immediate response was, we need to be reinforcing where those bullets are hitting. And a very astute Hungarian mathematician looked at it and said, no, you've got this problem all wrong. You've forgotten the context. You've got to remember that these are the planes that are coming back, right? And the reason they're coming back is because they didn't get hit in the other spaces. So if you want to be doing better, you want to be reinforcing where where there are no bullet hits, right? So this is the importance of feedback. We've got to be looking at, are we looking at the right things, right? And measuring. So data is critical, but is it the right kind of data? So I talk about feedback, and I think feedback is such a critical part. I said I'm a chemical engineer. What we do in chemical engineering is something called process control, and it's the essence of empiricism. Is we're building feedback in order to control some very complicated processes that are ongoing, and that whole element of control is what I think really has driven the agile approaches. It's something that's core in Kanban as well. It's how do we build feedback and how do we build appropriate feedback loops. So this is a story from John Cleese. John Cleese is famous for Monty Python, also for Fawlty Towers, and for the younger crew, he was Nearly Headless Nick in the Harry Potter series. Back in the 80s, he was doing some management videos, and there was one particular management video called The Importance of Mistakes, and his intro into this video is called Gordon the Guided Missile. And so he tells his story, a story from his childhood about how he learned about the importance of mistakes and the importance of feedback from a childhood book called Gordon the Guided Missile. So let me play this.
Gordon the Guided Missile
Nope.
sets off
Sound.
in pursuit of its target. Gordon the Guided Missile sets off in pursuit of its target. It immediately sends out signals to discover if it's on course to hit that target. And the signals come back. No, you are not on course, so change it up a bit and slightly to the left. And Gordon changes course as instructed, and then, rational little creature that he is, he sends out another signal. Am I on course now? And back comes the answer, no, but if you adjust your present course a little bit further up, and a little bit further to the left, then you will be. So he adjusts his course again and sends out another request for information. And back comes the answer, no, Gordon, you've still got it wrong. You must come down a bit and a foot to the right. And the guided missile, its rationality and persistence, a lesson to us all, goes on making mistakes, and on listening to the feedback, and on correcting its behavior in the light of that feedback until it blows up the nasty enemy thing. And then we applaud the missile for its skill. And then if some critic says, well, it made a lot of mistakes on the way, we reply, yes, but that didn't matter, did it? It got there in the end. All its mistakes were little ones in the sense that they could be immediately corrected. And as a result of making hundreds of mistakes, eventually, the missile succeeded in avoiding the one mistake which would really have mattered, missing the target.
So that's, to me, the essence of agility, is about understanding what your problem is, what you're really trying to solve, and what's the feedback necessary. If you don't have feedback, I see no means by which you can have agility. Right? Feedback is absolutely fundamental because it's about discovery, and agility is about responding to discovery. And feedback is absolutely critical to that. And I think it's absolutely critical to risky businesses. This is another tool that I like. I don't get obsessed with it, but I like it as a general framework, and I like the perspective of how do you look at it from a feedback perspective. So this is the Kneffen framework from Dave Snowden, and there's actually five areas here: the obvious, the complicated, complex, and chaotic. I'm going to go through each one very, very briefly. And then the middle area is disorder. So as we look at it, the obvious state. We look at it from a perspective of cause and effect, and and as well, what sort of distribution are we ending up with, and also what sort of feedback? And in the obvious state, there really is no feedback. It's an input to output, very much a linear cause and effect. Cause and effect is obvious. It's the home of the known knowns. Really not a lot of uncertainty here. And I look at manufacturing as being a similar something in this tends to be in this space, something where we're defining a well-defined process. The complicated space, we have inputs and outputs, but it looks a bit like a black box initially. It has, and the distribution is much wider. The cause and effect requires analysis. It requires experts to come in. And if we bring experts in, now by doing the analysis, we see what the black box looks like. We can see inside the black box. So this is, because it has known unknowns, and that's why the analysis can help us, because it can help us clarify this. And our approach here is to try to figure out, how can we clarify it better and get it better understood. It'll still have a bigger distribution, broader distribution than the obvious, but it is something where we can stay moderately linear still. Incremental product development frequently is in this space. In the complex space, the problem here is any degree we can't really do analysis in order to find the cause and effect. We can only understand cause and effect in retrospect. It's largely the home of the unknown unknowns, And in order for us to understand how the system responds, we need to send a probe through it. And by sending the probe through and getting the appropriate feedback, through that we can have a system which is controllable. Okay, this is our control loop that helps us understand how to manage this. And I think new product development tends to be in this space. And then lastly, we have the chaotic situation. And there's no known response, no known relationship between cause and effect. The distribution is quite wild. It's the home of the generally unknowables. And the whole idea here is you need to do something. You need to act. And I think one of the examples is a medical emergency. Right? First thing we need to do is stop the bleeding before we try to do anything else. Right? Once we've stopped the bleeding, then we can determine what's the secondary problem we need to deal with. But the patient's going to die if we don't stop the bleeding. I mean, in an IT world, it might be something like a security breach. Our immediate response is not to go figure out what caused it. Our immediate response might be to shut the network down in order to not allow the security breach to go worse, right? So keep the collateral damage to a minimum. So the next step I really want to get into is looking at just types of risks and types of risks that we see in multiple different industries and how we work with them, right? So when I've worked with this, I've given this presentation with Chris Madsen and Olaf Madsen, and we've sort of brainstormed, and we've ended up sort of settling in on 4 areas of risk that we look at. Business case failure, delivery failure, quality and market acceptance failures, and then collateral damage. And I'll go through each one of these individually as to where we go with it. The other thing that I find is the two different perspectives that we have on the risk. One is the business's perspective. So how does this risk approach, how does the business want to be approaching the risk perspective? And then the other is the individuals in the organization. How does the risk appear for them? And what I found interesting about this is when you compare the two, when there's a disagreement, discontinuity between these two, that's when it's ripe for politics, right? So if what should be happening from a business perspective is different from what individuals are feeling, then you'll get some potentially bad behavior and some opportunities for organizational politics to appear. So I'll go through that a little bit as well. So first we'll look at business case failure. This is a picture showing from Iridium. Iridium was a huge, colossal failure back in I think it finally went bankrupt in 1999 or something like that. After many years, spent multiple millions, hundreds of millions probably, sending satellites into space. There was going to be in the early phases of mobile phones, and the idea was they were going to have mobile phones. And the thing is, the problem was this whole thing got kicked off because the CEO's wife went on vacation to the Caribbean, and she didn't have a way to call home. And so they decided they're going to make this huge initiative in order to solve her need. The problem is they were going to make these mobile phones that weighed half a kilo at least. They didn't work inside buildings, all sorts of challenges, not really solving any fundamental customer need. So the thing is, business cases oftentimes are heading down the wrong fundamental direction. So how do we deal with that? Well, this is one of the other challenges I see. We have powerful questions such as what are we building? What business are we in? And unfortunately, what we frequently get, the question we get is, what building are we in, right? We get them wrong. We don't know what we're doing. What I look at is from a perspective of, is your strategy a bucket or is your strategy a filter? And I've seen both, right? Actually, more frequently, I think I see the bucket strategy, right? Is we're going to go into this space, right? Oh, well, that means this belongs, this belongs, this belongs. Buckets collect things, right? And that's an indicator to me that that's a danger spot, that you're collecting things. What filters do is they remove things, right? They help you understand what you're not doing. Let's look at some examples of some bad strategies. This is a book by Rumelt. They tend to be fluff They tend to have failure to face the problems. They mistake goals for strategy. They become fuzzy or overly complex strategic objectives. Things like increased market share. Yeah, obviously, that's a great strategy. What would I want to do that doesn't increase market share? Our fundamental strategy is one of customer-centric intermediation. I have no clue what that means. Right? Reach for the impossible to do the impossible. That's great strategy. That's 47 strategies and 178 action items. I guess they haven't heard of limiting whip. And action item number 122 was to create a strategic plan. These strategies have one thing in common. They are all crap. And I found a bucket for them. I found the perfect bucket for them. It's called the luggable loo. It's crap. So how do we get some good strategies? I mean, the whole essence from Michael Porter, the whole essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. Right? How can we figure out what to do by understanding what we're not going to do? So this is the purpose alignment model. It's by my book partner, Neil Nicolaisen. He was frustrated with trying to work with his partners when he was a CIO, and so he came up with this model to help really understand what matters. So he looked at two axes. One of market differentiating. What are we doing that's market differentiating? And the second one is what's mission critical that we take on. And so we look at this, and if we're in the low market differentiating and low mission criticality, who cares? Why do we want to do it? In fact, we want to eliminate and minimize those items. Now, if we're up in the high mission criticality and the high market differentiating, yeah, this is where we want to innovate and create. This is the spaces we want to really play in. If we're down in the parity space, we're still at mission critical, we need to get it done, but it doesn't differentiate us in the space. We want to be parity with our competitors. We don't want to be over-serving, because if we're doing more than what our competitors are doing, we're gold plating. We're not differentiating. The market says that's not differentiating. But we have to be as good as them, right? We have to be at parity. So we may still have to do things in order to keep up with them. So we want to achieve parity, we want to mimic, and we want to simplify in that space. And then we have situations where we may want to we have something that we can differentiate ourselves in the market, but it's not critical that we do it ourselves. And in that case, we want to look to see if we can create a differentiated partnership. This we found is a great tool to help us really clarify what's our purpose, and our purpose can help us drive our strategy. I found it, I've used it throughout my career at corporate strategy, product strategy, feature level. It's a nice tool that works at all levels. And we can look at a company like Apple. If we were to map them out at various stages in their life cycle, what are some of the things that Apple is known to be differentiating at? Throw out any ideas? Someone must know. What's that? Usability? Yeah, usability. Yeah, great. Yeah, usability? Excellent, yeah. So that's what. So I think these are three areas I think that they've been particularly strong at. New product design, user experience, content distribution. These are areas that they went and took a lead and took a leadership position on. There were other areas that when they were with the Mac, they were actually behind parity because they were behind the Wintel platform. So they had to come out and make some partnership. They had to make some parity level arrangements to get like Microsoft Office on the platform. They switched over to the Intel chip. And basically other software, they wanted to have this similar competition so they weren't well behind the Wintel, and then they could specialize in other areas that they were particularly good at. If you remember the original, when the iPhone first came out, at least in the United States, and I think it's also been a situation similar in Europe, they made strategic partnerships with network providers so that they didn't have to provide the network themselves. But they could monetize that partnership. So they made a deal with AT&T in the US where they could make a differentiated partnership for a couple of years. Eventually, then they decided there was more money to be made by having every network available, but in the early stages, they were able to generate market value, actual money from the relationship that they had with AT&T. So that differentiated partnership was actually value. And in Who Cares, they largely got out of the peripheral space. So this is just a sample of types of things you can look at this. And the idea is that if you've got more than 3 or so items in that differentiating space, you're probably trying to tackle too much. Right? You need to be looking at that. And that's what helps us with understanding our view of strategy. Another way of looking at this is from Fit for Purpose, that the book that David and Alexi wrote, and trying to really understand who are your customers, what's their purpose, and what problems do they want solved. You want to get really good at understanding this. Where are the challenges? What are the problems? Don't just create the problems. And understand and really look. Who are the customers that you're serving, the ones you really want to be serving, and are you solving their fundamental problems? So the types of challenges we have with business cases, the business perspective is what's our sustainable competitive advantage. The thing we have to watch out from the individuals is as individuals are creating business cases and saying this is what I'm going to, sometimes they're playing games, right? They're looking, how can I get more budget on my side of the business? What can I do to promote myself? So this can be a potential thing to watch out for. Is that we really want to be focused on the business first and not the individuals. So let's move on to delivery failure, things like late or over budget. The challenge frequently is what gets us into trouble is not what we don't know, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so. This is from famous American author Mark Twain. And I think this is one other challenge that we face with delivery issues is that we have created an environment where we really a traditional approach of relying heavily on estimation as an upfront estimation. And what we know, actually, is that upfront estimation is flawed in many ways. And so the other element of that I think is I love the second quote here, is it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. Right? And so we go into situations and sometimes negotiation situations where we're trying to look at things, and things aren't balanced, right? So how do we deal with this? Well, first we have to understand the reality of what are we facing. And this is something that I've spent a lot of time exploring data from software estimation. And I started looking at it with my company back probably 20 years ago or so, collecting data. And I realized that if I looked at comparing the original estimate against the actual, I was seeing a gap between the 90% probability of success to the 10%, that about 10% of the time my estimates were more or less on target, right? So I had about a 10% chance of hitting that initial estimate, but if I wanted to have a 90% chance, I had to be 4 times my initial estimate. And I thought, wow, this is really strange. And we were a very successful business. And this was what we were seeing. And I started looking at this, and I started looking at other companies and looking at all data around. And I saw this same pattern repeat itself over and over and over. This is not unusual. Yet, whenever I would tell people that this is what it looked like, they'd say, that can't possibly be, because we had our mindset, almost going back to that idea that our salary depends on too much certainty. We couldn't believe this. People wouldn't want to believe this. So the thing what I found is that I really had to reinforce the data. I really had to bring forth the data, and then not just our data, but this is something that we see frequently. We see this repeatedly. Now, you can improve this, but the reality is uncertainty is real, right? And we have to understand that a whole business model and delivery risk based on setting goals with estimates up front is a very dangerous place to be. So we want to be looking at what can we do instead? How can we operate that in a different way? And I think this is a particular perspective. In God we trust, all others bring data, right? So the first step to understanding your delivery problems is really to start collecting data and start understanding what do your lead time distributions look like. Are your distributions fairly normalish looking, or log normalish, or Weibull looking, Or are your distributions more like an exponential or even Pareto distribution? And if you're, the problem with distributions over here is that your predictability is very low because your range between your highs and your lows is a very, very long tail. Whereas in the more normalish, the further to the right here, you have much more ability to have predictability. And there's things we can do, and this is what we teach in Kanban, is about how to help you deal with trimming the tail, how to adjust your variabilities, your causes of variability, how to deal with your delays. So first, get the data, then start figuring out what you can do to improve and manage it. And this is really the core of what we teach in the Kanban Management Professional. This is an example here recently from Accenture Brazil, and you can see how they were behaving before, fairly consistent, but fairly consistently poor until the KMP1. They took the KMP1 and were able to make significant improvements in their throughput and overall delivery capabilities. And these are the types of things that we really emphasize in the core Kanban materials. So delivery risk, the business perspective is wanting to be looking at cost of delay. What's it going to cost? What's my value loss that I'm going to have by potentially being later or delaying my release? They also want to be credible. They don't want to be having too long a delays. But I think where we're really driven by as individuals, and particularly the managers feel like I've got to have credibility. And that's why, when I made my commitment to deliver, I'm going to meet it one way or the other. And that's a potentially dangerous place to be when you have this type of discontinuity. And in fact, this is essentially what happened, or this is behavior that happened at Ford Motor Company in the 1980s. Ford Motor Company was in serious trouble in the 1980s. Chrysler had just gone through bankruptcy, had been bailed out by the U.S. government. Ford was starting to go downhill as well. They were really hurting. And they came out with a new model, the Ford Taurus. Now, it doesn't maybe look like it's so spectacular, but in 1986, it was actually it was a really good car that served a particularly it met customer needs. And it met customer needs really well because the project manager on the project made sure it met customer needs, spent a lot of time on customer focus groups, spent a lot of times on feedback, and a lot of times on making sure that it was going to be successful in the market. And it was huge. It was a huge success. It saved the company. The problem with it was 6 months late. So saved the company, but it was 6 months late. So what do you think happened to the project manager? Demoted. Yeah. Because he didn't deliver on time. Saved the company, but didn't deliver on time. So, a couple years later, revision 2 of the Ford Taurus. What do you think was the most important thing to the project manager? Deliver on time. Horrible response in the marketplace. Very blasé. It did cut short all the things that the first project trimmed out all the customer feedback. Didn't need it. It's not important. It's going to add to my uncertainty. I'm going to reduce uncertainty. So make sure you got. What's it?
You were rewarded about the second.
I don't know. Yeah. Maybe he became the on-time guy. I don't know. So with that, I think related to that then is what does it mean in terms of market acceptance? How so we see that in the situation with Ford. We could deliver on time and have horrible market acceptance, or we could deliver 6 months late and save the company, right? So this is the situation where we've got that discontinuity between that personal issue and what's really good for the business. So if we look at market acceptance and the challenges that we have about making sure our deliveries are hitting on the market, I show this little picture about how I frequently see these big releases of new products, looks like it's going to be a big show, but then surprises happen. So let's play this one. product, great new product, all sorts of fanfare, yet it doesn't really meet our needs. It causes trouble. The great Gretzky said, "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not to where it's been." Right? We've got to be anticipating where we're going with the market. We've got to understand how are we connecting to our customers. I think the lean startup, it's just fundamentally feedback loops. The same thing. It's the scientific method. It's hypothesis experiment. And to understand how are we getting feedback, how are we gathering feedback from our customers, how do we know that we're solving the real problems that they have. Again, I refer back to fit for purpose. Some of the tools, there are a number of great tools. I've only collected a couple here, but make sure we're getting proper feedback from the front line. How are we collecting that in? How are we collecting the narratives from the front line? I think also the fit for purpose box score is a great tool for getting feedback. Are we serving their purpose? Are we meeting their needs? So driving additional feedback and getting that feedback and implementing it within the cycle, absolutely critical to make sure you're meeting the market acceptance. So the types of things we're trying to do is get the feedback. In the business perspective, we want to impact revenue, credibility, and we also want to reduce cost of rework. I mean, rework is something that can be a big problem. Now, the individual can often be guided by other perceived constraints. And this is particularly a challenge, I think, when we have this whole idea of the super product manager, and that we're going to trust the product manager to be the guy or girl who can be the CEO of a product, for instance. They're the ones who are making all the decisions about it. And I've frequently seen that can be a very powerful situation. It can also be extremely dangerous. And it becomes extremely dangerous when the feedback is not there. When the message is, and I would always tell my developers that they always, in fact, not always, they should be asking why all the time. They should be asking why. And the reason they should be asking why, a couple of reasons. One is they're making micro decisions all the time. I want them to understand the why. The other reason I was asking them, making sure they asked why, was because if the product manager couldn't explain the why, it meant they didn't know or they didn't want to explain it. And that's a very dangerous place to be. So that feedback loop, the feedback loop of the delivery team understanding what the product team is doing, and also making sure we've got proper feedback loop to our customers. We've got to do that in order to make sure that individuals are not running their own agendas. Now, a lot of times, product managers that I've seen, product managers end up driving it because they want their own solution, something that solves their problem, not solving the real problem that our customers are having. So something to watch out for. So collateral damage. This is another angle. So this is the London Ambulance Service. They rolled out some software, 11-hour wait times. Not a good thing if you're an ambulance. Probably caused 20 to 30 deaths by not being able to respond on time. So collateral damage can be serious. You can have delivery failure that results in collateral damage. This is the Denver airport, where software was blamed for the delay in the airport opening. And it was software that was going to handle the luggage system. And they had no backup plan. So there was no manual override possible. This is one of the types of things, whenever you're looking at collateral damage, you're trying to look at, well, what is the potential collateral damage and what are the things we can do about it? Do we need rollback plans? Do we need alternative plans? And so these are the types of things that really should have been looked at. This is oil and gas. Oil and gas deals with safety issues. I found this picture and threw this little quote on it. I'm beginning to think it wasn't such a good idea to turn off those unit tests, right? And we see this happen, and it sounds sort of funny, but it turns out that this actually is pretty close to what happened with the largest blowout that we've had. So the BP incident that happened about 10 years ago off the coast of Louisiana was the largest blowout, and huge issue. And fundamentally, if you trace it back to sort of its root cause, it's because they didn't run some tests. They had performed an activity on the well, a cementing activity on the well, and they usually do some testing that makes sure that cementing is going to hold. And the individuals were so time pressured, because they were behind schedule, they chose not to run those tests. Right? And by not running those tests, they ended up causing, there were a number of different things that happened, a number of combination of different things that happened, but fundamentally I think they could have avoided the whole thing most likely if they would have been running the tests that were standard process for them. So collateral damage can be catastrophic if you're not careful. On the individual perspective, some individuals may be willing to take more risk than the business really wants them to, right? And so this is where you have to have the loops that do a check and balance on that. So some risk management tools, I'll go through these briefly, some things that I particularly find valuable. I'll cover 5 of them very, very quickly. So the fundamental is around real options. I'm going to show you the tornado chart, and then 3 perspectives on value. Value of uncertainty, value of information, and then value of flexibility. So real options, so the idea of a real option, and we use the real options a lot in oil and gas, and this options is also what Chris Matz used in the financial space. The key of a real option is it's a right, but not the obligation to undertake certain actions prior to an expiry date. So airline tickets example, right? If I buy, now nobody uses hard tickets anymore, but the idea is that if I buy an airline ticket, I have the right to get on the plane, but nobody can force me on that plane, right? So it's an option. That ticket is an option. And most tickets are options. There are some tickets that are not options, like parking tickets or speeding tickets, right? That's not my option, right? That's I guess that's the government's option to not collect on it, but it is not an option. So this is Chris and Olaf, and they wrote a book, Commitment, about managing project risk using real options. They summarized it nicely as options have value. These are things that potentially have value because I have this right. That means it has a value. The option expires at some point in time, so understand that expiry date, and never commit early unless you know why. And these types of options are available. Sometimes we buy options, sometimes these options are available freely. The difference things is between an option and a commitment, we have options. At some point we can make decisions, and then eventually we make commitments. And the difference between decisions and commitments is decisions are easily reversible, whereas commitments are generally are hard to reverse. So if we look at someone jumping off a cliff, at the beginning of the time, they have an option. Do I jump or not? At some time, they make a decision, okay, I'm going to go jump. I'm going to start running. And at a certain point, that is not easy to reverse, right? They're getting very close to the edge. They can't reverse that anymore. At that point, they've made a commitment to jump. So we need to look at, we move on, we want to understand, well, what risks are important? So in this case, we've got a sign, great sign. Caution, this sign has sharp edges. Do not touch the edges of this sign, right? And then in a small case, it says also the bridge is out ahead, right? So we're paying a lot of attention to the sharp edges, but in the meantime, we've got a problem with the bridge. So which of them is important? Well, depends. I think the bridge out could be quite important. So what I'm familiar with in oil and gas, we use this a lot, and I think I'm starting to see it happen in other industries as well, is a tornado chart. And the tornado chart gives us a nice relative quantification. Sometimes it can be direct quantification. Oftentimes we do this using sensitivity analysis. Potentially can be coming from a Monte Carlo simulation or some other things. But in this case, we look at, in this situation, we clearly see that the amount of uncertainty in the reserves, the top line, is substantial. So there's a big issue as to how big the reservoir is, how big is the oil and gas reservoir. But things like cost are generally don't have a lot of uncertainty around them, right? So I don't need to be spending a lot of time trying to focus on reducing my cost uncertainty. My best answer is to be making sure that I understand the challenges. Can I do things that will help me better understand my reserves? So maybe I can go get some information. Maybe I can go shoot some 3D seismic. That may help me quantify my uncertainty. Maybe I can do some exploratory drilling that tells me something. The second area of oil and gas price, maybe there's other things I can do there. Maybe I can do some hedging in order to buy some futures contracts. Maybe that's a means by which I can manage my uncertainty. But the first step is just understanding it visually. Where are the challenges? the key is that there's a value of uncertainty. And if we look at this in financial space, cash has low uncertainty, but it also gives us low return. Whereas high growth stocks might give us a very high return, but they also have very high uncertainty. And the key is that we want to understand where's that value of uncertainty. And we don't want to just arbitrarily reduce uncertainty, because reducing uncertainty also comes by potentially reducing our return. So if we have something here and we want to reduce the uncertainty, at the same time, we very well may be reducing our return. So risk management is not about risk elimination or even uncertainty reduction. It's about understanding where that risk and uncertainty does and how it relates to your risk return reward. Are you investing or are you gambling? So if I look at, say, a product delivery example of a tornado, this and we looked at this and we said, oh, this is looked at. So product acceptance uncertainty, it might even give us a negative return. So maybe I'm looking at this and I say, as a manager, I don't like that red spot there. I don't like that we've got negative possibility. So I'm going to do things smart, and I'm going to change the dynamics of the project so it doesn't have that negative element. So I do that. And I think, oh, that's wonderful, I just removed it. The problem is that's naive, right? What likely really happened when I made that choice, when I reduced that uncertainty, was I also reduced the upside, right? And I may have reduced the mean as well. So that I'm getting less value. So this may be the right answer for your risk profile. But the thing is, you've got to understand what that looks like. So value of information. So this is an example from dentistry, right? So they're going to go into the dentist and look at filling a cavity, drilling and filling a cavity. Well, what do we want to make sure, right? We don't just want to go poking around with a drill and say, whoop, I guess that one didn't have a cavity. I guess that one didn't have a cavity. Oh, I found one finally. You want to get information. You want to shoot some X-rays and understand, what can I learn about it by doing some analysis. And this is sort of in that complicated space where I can get some information, and by getting some information, I now have the ability to make better informed decisions and approach that risk. Let's move on to value of flexibility. This is the Prius, the first hybrid. And so when it was coming out, they had never built a drive chain for something like, they didn't know what the engine was even going to look like because they hadn't built one before. So when they were doing the design for this, what did they end up doing? Well, they had 9 separate research projects that were exploring the different potential designs, and they didn't know what it was going to be. So which one of them was actually going to win out? So what they did instead was, rather than their traditional approach of designing everything up front, they designed a coupling, basically a hole that they'd be able to connect up to. And this way, when they found the approach that they selected out of the 9 research projects, they had a means by which they could connect it up, and they could continue the project in parallel. So it's really a modular design approach. And it was built the flexibility. They built flexibility into their design in order to enable them to continue and flow ahead. And I think this is very much lessons learned from software coupling as well. We gain a lot of flexibility from looser coupling, right? That's why we really promote loose coupling. Is the looser our coupling, the easier we can the more flexibility we can have, and also potentially reducing dependency issues. So let me go to a summary here from a TV show House, where there's a doctor involved and they're evaluating the situation with a young kid, and I think it's a good example of using a number of these different approaches.
Do you want to continue talking about me, or should we discuss what the liver damage tells us? I was born in a log cabin in Illinois.
Whoops. Sorry.
Do you want to continue talking about me, or should we discuss what the liver damage tells us? I was born in a log cabin in Illinois.
Hemolytic anemia doesn't cause liver damage. Add the fact he's coughing blood, you've got 3 of the indicators of organ-threatening lupus.
It's moving too fast. Could be hepatitis E.
There's only been one case of Hep E originating in the U.S. since
His history says he's been in and out of the country 4 times in the last year.
You really think he's got Hep E?
No, I think lupus is way more likely.
All right, then let's start him on IV Cytoxan and plasmapheresis.
No, we should rule out Hep E.
You just said it wasn't Hep E.
I said lupus is way more likely, but if we treat for lupus and it is Hep E,
He's toast.
exactly.
But there isn't a treatment for hepatitis E. Either he'll get better on his own or he'll continue to deteriorate.
Yeah, I went to medical school too. Start him on Solumedrol.
If he's got Hep E, that's only going to make him worse.
Not as much. It's Goldilocks, people. Won't hurt him so much that it'll kill him, and it won't hurt him so little that we can't tell. It'll hurt him just right. And if it does nothing,
we'll know it's not Hep E and can start treating for lupus.
now watch me do it while drinking a glass of water.
What do we tell the dad? We think your kid has lupus, so we're going to treat him from hepatitis E. And oh yeah, if it really is Hep E, we're not actually giving him Hep E medication. So it's going to make him worse, not better?
You think you'll go for that?
So you want us to lie?
No. I want you to lie.
Why me?
Because he trusts you.
So the follow-up here is my perspective that risk management is not risk aversion. So we'll play the second half of this.
What, because I lied to a patient? I take risks. Sometimes patients die. But not taking risks causes more patients to die. So I guess my biggest problem is I've been cursed with the ability to do the math.
Yeah. So that's the challenge, right? Is we've got to figure out what risks are we going to take, and some risk will cause, can be causing death, right? But not taking the risk can cause more deaths. And in a business situation, it's finding out where that's at and what is that business trade-off. So my summary of dealing with uncertainty, how do good companies deal with uncertainty and risk? First is know what business you're in, right? Get really good, you understand your business, understand your strategy, understand what business you're in. Discover the risks and uncertainty that dominate your business. What's dominating your business, what's dominating your competitive landscape. And get really good at managing for those types of uncertainties. Develop the skills for managing those uncertainties within your business area. That's fundamentally, I think, what really good companies do in the area of risk management. With that, this is a number of these tools. They're not directly pulled from enterprise services planning, but our enterprise services planning class is very much complementary to everything. And many of the tools that I suggested are directly in our enterprise services planning course curriculum. But enterprise services is really about our strategy, understanding our strategy and risk management approaches that we recommend in the Kanban world. There's a 5-day program, the executive track, which really focuses on strategy and product management, and eventually product areas. Then the product manager track that really focuses on things like real options and cost of delay. And then the expert track, which is getting into issues of dependency management and forecasting. We've also recently come out with taking much of that material and putting it into agile pain point solutions, some one-day classes. So these are types of challenges that we see in many agile implementations and Kanban and agile implementations. And so we've come out with one-day classes that address many of these risks and pain points. And again, there's the Fit for Purpose book and a 2-day class available on that, so highly recommend that. And lastly, just my contact information. That's my book, Stand Back and Deliver, where we do talk about the purpose alignment model. And then Chris Matz and Olaf Masson's book on commitment. So with that, I think we're ready to close out. I don't think we have any...
Well, 5 minutes or 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, if there's questions, I'll also be over at the, I think we're heading over to the David J. Anderson School of Management facility for a social. And if there's any questions right now, I can take a couple, or 1 or 2. But happy to talk as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you.